Hi, everyone. It's Janice, host of the Divorcing Religion podcast. Thanks for tuning into my show, whether you're joining me on audio or video. I've heard from some folks recently who have told me just how much the show has meant, and some of them have even found it not only to be life-changing, but life-saving, as they felt there was no one else who understood what they were going through, and they found the Divorcing Religion podcast, and they started feeling encouraged. Please help me keep my show on the air. Become a member by clicking the join button on the Conference on Religious Trauma YouTube channel. Hey everyone, welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious trauma recovery coach. My guest today is actress and entrepreneur Lia Dugal. Lia's experiences with religious trauma occurred while she attended Calvary Chapel in the USA. In her continued efforts to help unwind the effects of trauma, she has created a short film called I Am Fine, inspired by the suicide of a queer friend who was shamed by Christian beliefs. It also touches on different aspects of religious trauma. In sharing her story, Lia hopes to shed light on practices that have wounded many and been hidden for too long. Lia makes her life meaningful as an actor, model, content creator, and entrepreneur. Acting in film and theater across Oregon and California, Lia finds that her work as a fine art model has brought both healing and freedom from the confines of purity culture toxicity. She currently lives in Southern Oregon with her partner, Michael, and their cat, Tansy. Welcome, Lia.
Hi, welcome. Thank you very much.
I'm glad to have you here. And I'm really curious to know about your experiences with Calvary Chapel, because I think you're my first guest who has come out of that background. And I know that they were a very powerful influence when we think of the 1970s, 60s, 70s, Jesus People movement. They're kind of the first group that made it cool, for surfers to come in and be part of the group. They had it seems like in some ways they had a lower barrier for people to come in and feel like they could be part of the church, at least in the early days, because they were welcoming a lot of long-haired freaky people, as the song said. But tell me about your experiences with Calvary Chapel.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to touch base on the origins. Is that it was Chuck Smith took over. It was kind of a Calvary Chapel, had been a church, and he took it over in 1965. And he had come from a Foursquare background, and it didn't really kind of take off. It was really slow, like lots of older people, until the hippie movement. And he was like, I want to meet a real hippie. And then as a young man, I want to meet a hippie. And so his son, or one of his kids, brought this young man named Lonnie Frisbee into the fold, or to Chuck Smith. And Chuck Smith and this young hippie kid was like on fire for Jesus. And so that inspired the hippie movement. And if you look at past videos of the hippie movement, you can see Chuck Smith, and alongside him is this hippie kid, Lonnie Frisbee, like baptizing in the ocean. I mean, just Jesus movement, Jesus revolution, or whatever. And it was, the thing you were touching base on in accepting these sort of like these alternative beliefs, thinking like that was what Jesus was like, invite the poor, invite this different element, and not the kind of staunch, like elder going to church, dressing up and everything, the dirty feet on the carpet and all that. I guess Chuck Smith famously said, we'll just rip up the carpet if their feet get dirt, if they're dirty feet. So that kind of inspired it, because I remember when I started going in my early 20s. Now, I was not raised Christian at all. I was led there by a boyfriend in college. But when I went, there was a college youth pastor that, looking at Lonnie, had a very similar look to Lonnie, long hair. So that was an element that went all the way through, this sort of like relaxed, kind of relaxed on your dress and your style was that image, and that was the image. And then it started shifting, and like when I was going there, I started in about 2000, 2001, and then I stayed with different, both in Oregon and then in California until 2010, on and off through that time period. And it went from being a little bit hippie-ish to going into more of that, like in the 2000s, there's a hipster. And so you'd see a lot of like, they'd be dressed like hipsters. And so their big thing was sort of to like blend in and accept this, be a little unconventional. Like that's image, like that's the image. And I'm really kind of highlighting that idea of image, because that's what it is. And there's not a lot, like as I'm kind of been reflecting on and doing a lot of research for this podcast, that's like the image is right there. This image of accepting the outside world and kind of looking like the outside world to accept them in. That's as far as it goes, because once you get involved, once you get kind of sunk into it or brought into the fold, it becomes a lot more manipulative and controlling. And for me, when I say that I came into the church world when I had to be like 22, 23. It's like, well, I was raised in a public school. I was raised like with a family that said, we're not going to be religious. You can make your own decisions, during the 90s. And I went to a very small public school where I had access to a teacher who taught critical thinking. Like, why would you do this? Right now I'm in therapy for CPTSD, for not only more religious trauma, but a lot of going back to my family of origin. My father is a clinical narcissist. And so I look back on my upbringing as him and very authoritarian, sort of high control. And so when I entered, and I even remember having this kind of in the back of my mind, I wasn't really cognizant until recent times, but when I entered the church, when I started going to it, I said, kind of thinking, wow, this seems similar to my upbringing, but maybe this is that unconditional love, and then the God is the Father. So somewhere in there that I was kind of looking for all my life. And that's been a lot of my healing work, is trying to like unpack what, like looking at actual positive father roles versus what is not, and trying to heal that. And so that's what drew me to it, is that sense of like, here's this unconditional family, because the way that I was raised, it was very controlling. We didn't show a lot of emotion. It was very stoic. We weren't allowed to show emotion unless it was accepted by him. So it was very like, it was run like kind of a very controlling church in a way, like how I was raised. And so at first glance, going into this church that, they're playing the guitar and they're playing the drum, and it's like very, and the pastor, the youth pastor anyway, he's got kind of long hair and he's wearing like a kind of hemp necklace with a cross on it, and like, oh, this feels cool. This feels, no one talked about Lonnie. When I was there, I never heard about Lonnie Frisbee. I never heard about, like, they would talk about the Jesus Revolution and how that's where it began with Chuck Smith, but the word Lonnie name never came up. So keep that in mind. And so I began going to it. Another factor is, in addition to my kind of narcissistic father, I've had a lot of, as you would imagine, romantic partners that have been narcissistic. My college boyfriend, I'm processing now, was definitely somewhere on that worldview. He was maybe almost like oppositional. I mean, and so we would have, but very abusive. I'm looking back on that time period and where I am, and I think I remember the day that I said the sinner's prayer. We'd been arguing all day. It was like a Saturday and Sunday. And then I remember him talking about Jesus. At the end of the day, I'm very, very tired. I'm laying in bed next to him, and he starts talking about Jesus after. And so it's almost like now I look back on it, in a sense, he had taken me to church, and maybe he had worn me down to then bring up this Jesus thing so that he could use it as a hey, I brought her to Jesus. And so then that was always like a ploy when we eventually would break up, and I went off a couple years after I finally got out of that relationship after about 3 years or so, and I started dating other people that were not Christian, and he would use that ploy against me. You're backsliding. You're not walking with the Lord, and to shame me, and to bring up my weaknesses.
Well, did the church know then that you were living with your boyfriend or having relations with him while you were attending the church? Like, was that an issue for them?
I don't know if some of them might have, as far as in the college group, some of them might have had a kind of a clue that they were together. But I think the whole church didn't. But as far as did they accept it? No. And they didn't accept the drinking. They didn't, the partying of a college lifestyle. That particular boyfriend was also very big party. I mean, alcoholic, drug addict. I've lost contact with him, but up to the time that I knew him until 2013, it was still an issue for him. And yet he would, party and do all that stuff and then show up on Sunday and be like, oh, So it's very two-faced.
Right.
So yeah, no, I think some of them might have known, but he was very manipulative of not showing that. I mean, he lived with me not because I wanted him to, but because he got kicked out of his own place, didn't have the rent. And then his parents were like, if you go to school, we'll pay your everything. And then he didn't comply with that. So they, so he needed a place to live. Well, and that was the nature of our relationship. It was strained because, he wouldn't go.
and the narcissistic piece is really interesting to me as well. So having a narcissistic parent in the home and can really prime us for having codependent traits or coping skills, if you want to call it that. And then we often end up with partners repeating that same dynamic. And we certainly know that a lot of leaders in religious groups are often very charismatic and can tend to have traits of narcissism as well. I'm curious because you've mentioned this Lonnie person a couple of times, that he was kind of instrumental in the shift that the church made because they wanted to use him as an example or for whatever reason. And then he was nowhere to be found by the time you got there. Is that true?
Yeah, no, he died in, I believe, do I have it in my notes? Yeah, he died in 1993. So Lonnie, when Chuck Smith met Lonnie, he was married to a woman named Connie. And Lonnie did he did really kind of help the Jesus movement move forward, not just with Calvary Chapel, but the Vineyard of Faith Church. Lonnie Frisbee was a gay man. And this is actually something you can look up. There is a Amazon documentary made by his friends in 2005 called The Life and Death of the Hippie Pastor. Like Frisbee, The Life and Death of this. Yeah. And he was a gay man, and he tried, he's married to this woman. He tried to comply with what with what he was being taught. He tried not to be gay. When they came out that it was gay, they basically ostracized him from the church and wrote him out of the church books. He eventually died of AIDS in 1993. At his memorial, Chuck Smith talked and referred to him as Samson and said he had this weakness and what might have been. And Connie, his ex-wife, who they're still really close, was just furious. It's like, can you just let that go? The man is dead, But I didn't know about that. And so he died in 1993, and I started going in 2000. Calvary Chapel is superb at burying things and covering. And you would think even today in like the internet boom, like everything is available, it's a lot harder for them. But like when I was doing research, not just on my story, I would type up Calvary Chapel. If you type up the Catholic Church or Southern Baptist,
Southern Baptist.
yeah, you're going to see things not just on the churches, but you're going to probably see things come up related to some of the not so good stuff. Calvary Chapel, you would have to make it very specific to like Calvary Chapel abuse. And even that, you're going to find things, Bible studies from Calvary Chapel about what to do in abusive marriage. It's not going to be like, it's like, you're going to have to really search. So I feel like they really sort of like are aware of their presence to try to control that narrative. They just came out with a film a couple of years ago that was funded by them. It was a pretty big film. They had, what's his name? Fraser played Chuck Smith. What's his name? Kelsey Grammer.
Oh, really?
And they're talking about the origins of it. And I didn't see it, but I feel like it was their way of sort of starting to control the narrative. Oh, people, it's out there. People are talking about Lonnie. People are talking about this. We better, and the whole tagline was all are welcome. Because they're like you said, the hippie movement, like we're letting all these hippies, we're letting all these be, all are welcome, except if you're gay,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I do just want to insert here, because I neglected to do so at the beginning. You and I may be touching on content related to sexual abuse, CSA, and suicidality as well. So just to put that little warning out there for folks, if you might have a difficult time with that, it might be time for you to turn off this episode and join us again for the next one. But sorry to interrupt, Lia. Please keep going. I really appreciate the things that you're saying about how it appears now that Calvary Chapel is really trying to control the narrative, because the truth will come out. That's what happens. People end up finding out the truth sooner or later.
And even when the truth comes out, they then find a way to continue to bury it or try to, so that they can control and manipulate those that are going to the church, that are the parishioners, the layperson, that's not, there's a lot of a cult of personality within that. And there's something they used to say, the pastor used to say from the pulpit when I was there is, don't worship me, worship God.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say that enough, they speak in threes, and they're like, don't worship me, don't worship me, don't worship me, worship God. So you eventually kind of hear in your brain, don't worship the pastor,
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're really skilled at the art of like manipulation, at the art of speaking, at the art of using words to kind of get their agenda or their point across. And the way they speak it, the way they even sound, it's a very unique way of speaking.
Mm.
And so that cult of personality that, you take this man, this young man, it's always a man, at an early age, he's raised in this kind of Calvary Chapel worldview. He goes to the school, or he's homeschooled or something. He's told, you're anointed by God at like 18. Don't go to college. Don't get any outside training. Continue through here. We'll raise you up. You're anointed by God. So he has no critical thinking skills, no real outside education other than what he's been raised with. And then he's told he's like the mouthpiece of God, right?
He's special. Mm-hmm.
So, and there's a lot of top down. So what the senior pastor says goes. So if the senior pastor is doing something not legit, he can sort of use that bullying tactics. There's been a lot of bullying tactics. From what my research recently, some stuff came out from 2021, right up the road from me, Applegate Christian Fellowship. There's a big scandal, which you probably didn't even know about because it was covered up, and it wasn't even in the local news here or the local papers. And I mean, I wouldn't be paying attention to it because I haven't been with Calvary Chapel since 2010,
Mm-hmm.
But like in anything, like I haven't even really, I think the last time I really paid attention was like 2013. But somehow it came across my radar that so John Corson started Applegate Christian Fellowship, and I'm mentioning him because he's like a celebrity within that worldview. And he was like kind of for a while like a right-hand man of the Chuck Smith. They really they chose Lonnie, and then Lonnie, so they find these young men and they sort of like raise them up, and then they get another set of young men, and then those young men go out and find other young men and raise them up. So it's very much like insulated, and everybody's learning from this one way. And so I think John Corson was kind of like that to Chuck Smith. And the scandal that came out is that John Corson's son, Ben Corson, was senior pastor, or one of the senior pastors. I think they were doing it together. He had gotten divorced from his wife. I read somewhere that she had to sign an NDA, which why, I don't know. But in light of what now has come out, 5 women locally have come forward and reported sexual abuse from Ben Corson.
Oh, dear.
He got off for some reason and moved away, resigned, went to California, but now he's teaching there. And that's what Calvary Chapel does whenever there's any kind of scandal. They just move him to another part of the country and hope everyone doesn't look online or anything like that. I don't know if they'll get away with it as much this time because, there's more kids, there's people. To go back to my story is, so when I would eventually break up with that boyfriend, and then I spent some time, I graduated from college, living in the town I'm living in now, which was my college town, working, and I had boyfriends that weren't Christian. I had, just kind of walking two worlds, and feeling very shame because I was having sex and I was exploring my sexuality as a young person, and also being a young person, like going out and partying and doing all that stuff. Like I don't have a substance related problem. I was just being a 20-something, but I was feeling shame for it. Shame is a big component to get you come back to the church. You're walking away from God. So this is the right path. So I got a big breakup from one of those boyfriends, and I kind of surrendered and came back to the church and became a lot more on fire. I would move back to where I grew up in California in about 2004 to go to grad school, chosen by my dad, basically, to be a teacher. I was not wanting to be a full-time elementary school teacher. I never wanted to be. I like kids. I'm pretty good at teaching them, but I don't want to do that, And so from there, I found some Calvary chapels down there. The first thing I really kind of, in those early days, stuck out to me is when I was living here and going to the Calvary Chapel here, the different ones. I remember them saying, we believe in interfaith meetings. And they would actually go to other kind of types of churches. So they'd go to like a Baptist. If like a Baptist was having like a Bible study that wasn't at the time they had something, they would go. I would see the pastor going there. They'd have dinners and things. It was always more of, I don't think it was more of a liberal minded church. It was always more of like conservative, but it was like, it was within that frame. Like if it was a Baptist or Nazarene or something like that, they would meet. When I went to California and they would talk about, we're having interfaith like connections, it was always Calvary chapels. And I was really struck out to me. It's like, oh, cool. That's cool. Interfaith. And that's not interfaith. That's interdenomination. That's insulating you with this one worldview. And it became very exclusive in the sense of we are doing it the right way. We have the right way to do church. We have the right literal translation of the Bible. These other churches that are conservative, that are, fundamentalists or whatever, evangelical, but they're not doing it the right way. We need to get them to come to our church. And I noticed a lot when I would socialize or meet other Christians that weren't part of Calvary Chapel, and I would say, well, I go to Calvary Chapel. There was a little tension. like, oh, the Calvary Chapel, because it was, and I've still noticed it today. I have a friend sort of that's Christian, and I've talked to her in the past about she does not like Calvary Chapel because of how exclusive and exclusive and kind of like the snobbery,
Yeah.
looking
that seems
down.
like the opposite of what the image they were trying to promote, which is everyone is welcome. And now it sounds like they've kind of gone in a different direction. And I also am thinking about, so I attended a Vineyard church for years, and we were there because we loved the music. And Vineyard and Calvary Chapel very closely related. And then I think of Hillsong in Australia, and just the idea of how powerful music is, and how you mentioned early on that the Calvary Chapel church was kind of trying to reflect the world to the world, so the world would feel comfortable coming in. They dressed like them and started talking like them. And the music, I think, is also similar. So it feels like the church is always almost trying to do a ripoff of whatever's going on in the world. Then the church wants to adopt that as a way to try and grow itself and suck people in.
Yeah, I would say, suck people in, kind of co-opt it for their own gain. Co-opt the language, co-opt the dress. I think that if they would, like, I would remember, I was towards the end of my time in California. I wasn't going to Calvary Chapel. I was going to a Foursquare church, and that church was a really sweet church. And they had these like Friday night, like cafe things, and they were like, play music and read poems. And one time, the son-in-law of the Calvary Chapel that I'd first gone to in California was playing, and he was a youth pastor at that time. He had a CD. He was just starting his music career. He was playing all this music, and so he came to play music, and all of the youth pastor and all the Calvary Chapel people came, and that was the only time they ever came to any event. And they would come, and they would be so sweet, and they'd be like loving on all these people. And then I know that they would go back into their little worldview and talk about how, they do it that way, but we're really doing it the right way. We don't speak in tongues. That's distracting. We don't do this. We don't do that. They do that. That's so weird, and it was just so two-faced. And so there's that element of us against them. Not just within like church, Calvary Chapel, and the world, or the non-Christian, but also in a sense the other kind of Christian. Right. We're the better ones. We're the top.
Well, then what eventually got you stepping back from Calvary Chapel or from Christianity?
I think that was, there's little inklings throughout my walk with God.
Oh, yeah, with the air quotes.
That struck out to me. I think, fortunately, I did have high school education with critical thinking, and then in college, critical thinking and psychology. And I think that kind of foundation was there. And so to kind of go forward in my story, I started going to this Calvary Chapel, and because of my upbringing, I'd always had a lot of like emotional ups and downs, mental health issues, depression. They thought I had depression in high school, ADHD. I don't have really either of those, but I working and teaching, and that my living at home, because I was told that a woman really, like, you need to keep yourself pure and maybe stay at home until you like get married, and don't live with a guy, all that thing. And even though there wasn't like IBLP, it wasn't like that. You could wear a jean, you could do all that, but I do knew people within that worldview, within Calvary Chapel, that were raising their kids with that curriculum.
Right. And we'll just put a shout in there, IBLP, Institute for Basic Life Principles, Bill Gothard, just a whole different another cult, taking things extremely
So
fundamentalist.
yeah. So that was an influence with some of the people I was around, and they were sort of advising me that maybe I should live at home until I get married. And so I moved back in after I'd been out of the house with this father, which in some way it was kind of good that I finally could see it as an adult. Helped me to awaken because I was living there and I was teaching. He had this very strict policy. My first year of school, first year of teaching, he always wanted, if you're living there, you have to have dinner. And it's not just a quick dinner. It's like 6 until 9. If you're home, you have dinner with us. And so I would come home from work and I'd be tired, but I was a new teacher and I had more stuff to do, but I couldn't because I had to sit at the table from 6 to 9 and then I'd be tired. So I started having mental breakdowns.
Wow.
I was given the diagnosis of bipolar. The pastor of this particular church that I was going to, the first Calvary Chapel in California, he seemed kind of open to mental health issues as far as the grand scheme of Calvary Chapel does not believe that psychology and that mental health is a thing. In a way, they think it's demonic. In the way, they think it's worldly, and you need to just pray. And yet this pastor was very good about saying, it's an illness like no other, why you wouldn't tell someone that's diabetes that's satanic or demonic. So why this? And so in one way that's very good, but in another way, as I experienced my mental health further and further and had this father wound, which I had asked him to be sort of a spiritual father, I was so to go back a little, before I started having my breakdown, I had met this young man, we're going to call him Ryan, at a coffee shop. And he approached me at the coffee shop, was working there. He said, do you go to church? And I said, oh, yeah, I do. I'm a good Christian. I'm going to bring this guy to church. And we started dating. And early on in our dating or courtship or whatever you want to call it, he confessed that he'd been raised Christian by his family. His dad had come out to him and his family and was living with a man at the time, and then had eventually moved back in with a family to try to rekindle it. And Ryan had told me that when he had stepped away from the church and had been worldly and been all doing that stuff, and he said, I had relations with men, and I still feel this desire, because it was early in that 2000s, it was, to my shame, there was a lot of discussion about homosexuality within the church being a sin, being one of the great sins. And I mean, I started in 2000, I didn't hear much of it, but then 4 years later, it started to be a bigger thing. And I think that was more of a political thing, that maybe things were heating up. And I remember one of the things when I came to California, they said a lot of fear tactics, but I remember this specifically. California governor just passed a law that if they catch a pastor speaking out against things that are illegal or that are legal and they're talking bad about it, speaking of homosexuality or whatever, the police are going to come and arrest them. And I'm like, oh my God, this other world, these police are going to barge in and take this pastor away for never happened, but it was definitely that sense of fear tactic, this, and that was a common thread within all the Calvary chapels I went to. We're going to get arrested for talking against things that are acceptable in the world. But so this pastor, so when I started having my breakdowns, because I was teaching, I was still dating that boyfriend, but it became very hard on him, obviously, because he didn't know what to do. I was having meltdowns. I was screaming at people because I didn't know how to process all my emotions because I hadn't been raised that way. They diagnosed me with bipolar. I'm thinking more just PTSD. They also tried to diagnose me, the psychiatrist, with borderline personality disorder. But from now that I know, BPD and PTSD can look a lot alike. So I'm thinking I don't know if I was misdiagnosed as bipolar. I don't want to throw that out at all, but definitely PTSD. Definitely the while things are going with. And then I'm also in a very like high control, like religious organization that would also cause some trauma. And this pastor really, so before Ryan came back into my life, when I had first started going to that church and I was fine, I was like, okay, seemed like a healthy, happy, on fire for the Lord, Jesus girl. This pastor kind of took an interest in me and would establish an open friendship that I thought was just this nice kind of father-like figure. I had one of my fortunate blessings as I have had blessings, very close father type relationships with high school teachers and such. And that's wonderful. That's something I treasure, and nothing ever came of it. But so I thought it was something similar to that. Now looking back as things progressed and how he even sort of took control of my mental illness, and I would go to him and distraught, and I'd feel better, and then literally walk out the door, and I'd suddenly be like more distraught. And then what happened in about August 2007, my favorite grandpa died. My boyfriend finally was breaking up with me, but it was like on again, off again. So it was very rocky. Of course, my favorite grandfather would die, but family wasn't even really addressing it. So I was like the most pain I'd ever felt. I had no one I could really turn to. And I went to him and I was so crying. I was overwhelmed with stress. I'd been trying to work by this time I'd lost my teaching job, but I was doing just like a part-time gig at retail. I felt like a failure. It was like 10 years out of high school, and like, here I am, like, what's going on? And go to this pastor who seems to have been helpful to me. And he gets me to calm down. One of the things he says before I calm down is, your tears are like crocodile tears. They're just here to get attention. I had never been able to express emotion. So what I wanted to say, what I wish I could have said was, no, I've never felt this much emotion. I don't know how to not cry.
Right.
When I finally calmed down, I was walking out the door and I said some little joke. I don't remember what it was. And he looked at me and goes, lots of women that I've ministered to have started to develop feelings for me. And I just froze.
Ew.
I never thought that. I never looked at him that way.
Wow.
What? I would do something a week later or so that would cause him to ask me to leave the church after I'd been like having all these breakdowns and things. He was like, you need to leave. You're out of control. That's fine. But no one knew that he had said that. And I still, no one knew. So I left the church. I was kind of stumbling around. My insurance changed. I didn't really have like therapy. I was trying to figure it out. I eventually started going to another church that everybody was so stoked about this church because it was pastored by the grandson of Chuck Smith.
Oh, boy.
And so I started going there, among other places. And I was really like kind of really invested in my recovery, both on the kind of Christian spiritual aspects of it. But also, so going to Calvary Chapel, also attending a 12-step Christian group called Celebrate Recovery. And then also started going to NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, and just really investing. Like that was my recovery at the time. That was like my job was that. Okay. And so aspects of that, like I'm not a Christian anymore, but I look back on Celebrate Recovery and I'm like, yeah, that was really good experience. I got healthy. I really worked through a lot of my issues. Looking back on sitting at the coffee shop and reading the Bible, that was fun. I don't mind reading a book. Okay. Like I joke that like one of the ways that they got me was like as an avid bookworm, they said, here's the Bible, here's a book, read it. I'm like, cool. And then they started losing me is when I was going to this Chuck Smith's grandson's church was because they started kind of controlling in a very kind of underhanded way what books we should read. and that, you know, might want to stay away from some of even the classics. There, you know what? We've got some books out here on the table, and they're Calvary Chapel kind of sanctioned authors. You should read these. We recommend these. I don't mind reading those books. They look pretty interesting, but I also want to read these psychology books that I'm studying for my own health. You know, I want to read everything because I'm a bookworm. And then they also started sort of kind of controlling, or not really controlling, maybe dictating, sort of saying, maybe you should steer away from certain media. You know, I remember early on, a friend of mine and her husband had broken all their CDs from when that were secular.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't break my CDs. I had all these like Adam Sandler CDs and all this, like, I love SNL. And I think I gave them to Goodwill or something. And I'm like, oh, you know, I gave away all these things that were of my past. So that's kind of where that IBLP influence. So yeah, they started to be very much about controlling intake in a very way that was like I was talking about, the speaking in threes, the use of that kind of manipulation tactics. So it wasn't out and out saying this, but you got the hint a lot of times. And so, and at the same point, I'm going to therapy and I'm doing this 12-step group, and I'm really educating myself, and I'm, you know, kind of starting to see those cracks. I remember they talked about, the other thing I remember in about 2008, 2009, they would talk about how God created man and woman. And this was really before people were starting to really come out about being transgender. That was still, I don't want to say relatively new, because it's always been a thing, but it wasn't. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I remember in college taking a class about, I think it was called transsexual at the time. Now it's intersexual, people born with both parts. So how God created man and woman, but biologically there are people born with sex organs. So, and I remember thinking that and just being like, don't think that, just, you know, put away. But I think, critical thinking skills, the fact that they started to tell me what books I couldn't read, and then their aspects of psychology. To get back to that pastor, is during this time I wasn't going to the church with him, but I would see him around town. And when it was him by himself, like if I saw him at a coffee shop, he was like welcoming, come sit with me. And then if I saw him, like if he happened to come to the Chuck Smith grandson church one time, I went up to talk to him because I thought we were friends. And he goes, "You're getting too close to me," and rebuffed me. For no reason. So now I look back on that, as I was getting better, he was still like playing this game. You know, of like seeing how he could, you know, all of that.
There's some mind games going on there. I need to ask you, because our time is getting a little bit shorter.
Oh, sorry.
Tell us about how you came to do a short film.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I want to say that if you want me to come back and talk more about Calvary Chapel, I can, because that's we could actually go more into detail.
Thank you.
If you would like, I showed my story. I was trying to process, like, how do I do my story, but also try to touch on Calvary Chapel. So if you ever want me to come back and just do more, just Calvary Chapel, I would welcome to do that, because I really want to start bringing in, or raising awareness and bringing to light the things that they've done. So I've been out of this world since about 2010, when I got married and then I got divorced. And once I got divorced, I was able to start really processing all of my life, and specifically early on, the religious trauma. And so I was able to kind of work through it pretty fast, because I'd only been in a short period of time, as far as like come to some sense of peace. I was able to have a lot of, I found a podcast, shout out to the Drunk Ex-Pastors, which they're former Calvary Chapel pastors. They're not anymore. And they really, a lot of laughter from them about, and that really helped, about the absurdity of Calvary Chapel. And then also helping me to see I wasn't alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so just kind of working through that. And then getting back into my actual recovery for PTSD, I realized there are people that from my past that I was in a good place. So I was moving forward in my life and I was in a really happy place. So I didn't really think about moving back or looking back, but I realized the relationship with Ryan had ended really badly.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time I talked to him, it was not positive on my part. And I'd never reached out to him to tell him, hey, I'm in such a good place. I hope you are too. When I look him up online, I find a memorial page.
Oh, dear.
And when I finally connect with some people that knew him, and I find out that he had died in June of 2016, and I was in a really good place. I was starting my film business. Things were going well. That's what I said. I started making films myself in 2016 and not just kind of acting in them, but actually making them. And so I was in a really happy place myself. And so I had no idea anything. And I wasn't even really thinking about Calvary Chapel. So when I looked him up in 2021 to make amends, and I came across this memorial page, and I reached out to a friend that I recently reconnected with, and she told me, well, he took his own life. She didn't know. Not a lot of people knew that he was queer. Okay. He wasn't out. So that's why I'm using the name Ryan, which is the name in my film. So I was devastated. I never got to tell him that, and that he also never got to know what I know now. He never got to know that he is fine as he is, and that if he wanted to be a Christian and love Jesus, he could do that as a gay man or a queer man, and even if he was married to a woman, they had kids, even if and he'd only been married for like 3 years before he took his own life, even if he was bisexual, say, and he was married to this woman, he could still be a happily married man to a woman and be bisexual and love Jesus. He could still be fine. So I wanted to sort of find a way to share that. And then as I was writing it, I started inputting some of my experiences. Fortunately, the pastor never got far enough with me to do anything. Nothing happened. Good. But I believe he was grooming me. I don't know. And so I wanted to show that that's an aspect within this worldview. Now, my church in the film is not Calvary Chapel. It's not a known church. It's a made-up church. It's Fellowship United Christian Kingdom. Now spell that out.
It's going to look good on a t-shirt. Oh my gosh, that's funny.
I never thought about that. Maybe I will do that. But yeah. So we just made up a fake church name. But we painted up a sign for the actual church service, and it kind of looks a little bit like the upside down dove, Yeah. So little nods, but I didn't want it to be a certain church because this is universal religious trauma. And so there is aspects of religious trauma that not just the main character, Ryan, goes through, right, and tries to work through, but the other people it comes across. So he's got a friend that she's dealing with sexual trauma, sexual abuse within the church. And then his boyfriend that came out of an LDS movement and shares that he was a part of conversion therapy. And then his mom shares that she's kind of part of what I was going through, the sense of emptiness within that worldview, and that people aren't really connecting. So it really, as I was writing it, it became sort of a voice for this overarching kind of what religious trauma looks like. Right. But it's also, yeah.
How long did the film turn out to be?
So the film is just under 30 minutes. As of now, I've been re-editing it. It's been edited. I'm fine-tuning it because we're going to release it locally on December 6th. And then from there, a couple other local releases. And then hopefully one of the actors lives up in Washington. So I think we're going to go up there. Maybe you could come down.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
not too far.
probably some streaming platform. I haven't really fully gotten that far.
Cool.
But yeah.
I want to also ask, because I think our viewers will be intrigued. One thing that has also been helpful for you, in addition to, I'm sure, writing that film, very cathartic in a lot of ways, and the work that you also have been doing as a model.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I started doing the modeling in around 2012 when I was married. I was kind of doing it here and there, but not enough to actually, make it a job or a profession. So
And this is fine art modeling. This is different from regular. So does that mean you either just have a towel on or sometimes nothing on, and people are drawing you in their art classes?
Mostly nude. So it's life drawing, figure art modeling. I've done photography as well, but mostly the paid work is I work for the universities, the community college. That's a regular paid thing.
Nice.
I've started, there's a lot of studios around here, and it's in the early days of about 2014 is when I really started working more full time as a life model. It was a challenge because it is equated with like sex work in a way, because you're naked, even in this worldview.
Right.
And coming out of the purity culture and having this sort of like fear of being like looked at, or it's the woman's fault if the man is tempted, and you have to cover yourself, even if it's not like in certain churches where you're wearing the long dresses and everything. I know I've always been a very big-breasted woman, so I really had to sort of cover up. If I was even wearing something like this or even a little lower, it would show so much, tight fitting. And so coming out of that, I think it's really been about my body is my body.
Yeah.
And I very fortunately have worked with some male teachers that are very protective of me and very respectful. And so I've never felt unsafe.
Nice.
And they have male models that come in and are completely naked, and they never look at me like they never talk about me, or even the male model, I would imagine, as if we're, a sexual object, or look at how this looks like a triangle, like that's the objectification.
Right.
So it's been, it's my body is my body, and what I do with it is what I do with it. And
I love that so much.
And I think I've also been able to embrace of lately the history of being an art model, because you've seen these women and these men going way back. Who were they? And that's not pornographic at all. It's just a fact of being a human with a body.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for sharing that piece. I feel like that could be significant and encouraging for people who are watching or listening to this episode, because it has everything to do with agency and autonomy and acceptance, body positivity. These are all things that are so important, because being involved in religion, fundamentalist religions for sure, can really rob us of all of those things. And so I love the work that you're doing, the film that you have just been working on, and also the art modeling that you're doing. Thank you. Thank you for coming on here and sharing your story with us. How can people find you?
Well, if you want to find out more about the film, where it's going to be seen, this and that, or just more about my company, Cafe Girl Thriving Artists, LLC, the website is cafegirlproductionsinc.com. My personal Instagram is @bornagainwiccan, which I love that. I love reclaiming that. And then my business Instagram is @CafeGirl11. So
very nice. And that's the number 11 @CafeGirl11.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lia. This was just a delight to talk with you. And I'm sure we'll be in touch down the road as your film rolls out. So thanks again for joining me.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. And I do also want to give a shout out to Smart Recovery, SMART Recovery, for anyone who's interested in recovery from addiction with a more secular focus. And also, you can go to my website, divorcingreligion.com. Please take care. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye, everyone.